Hey everybody, guess where we're at? We are at Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary, and we are getting ready to go wild. John Weeks is with me with Weeks Paranormal. Go subscribe to his channel if you haven't already. I'm excited. You excited?
Yeah, I can't wait.
Alright, we'll see y'all in a little bit. Peace.
The gates to hell opened in 1896. The history that lives on at Brushy is yours to witness. It is an experience like no other. Coal mining in the South. Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary wasn't just a jail. For decades it was a coal mine for the state of Tennessee that originated in the wake of a bloody labor battle. The end of the Civil War led to a boom in railroad construction and the rapid expansion of the coal mining industry throughout Tennessee. Because many of the state's coal veins were located in remote areas, most mining companies providing housing by collecting rent from miners' wages. When those companies opened on-site stores selling food, clothes, and other necessities at inflated prices, already poor workers piled up debt. By the time their debt and rent were paid, they had little to show for a meager wage job with dangerous working conditions. The Coal Creek miners were clever, holding strikes in winter when coal demand was high. This tactic worked until a new convict lease program gave companies a cheaper, more compliant workforce. The prison lease system was adopted throughout the South mainly because state governments couldn't afford to build and maintain prisons or feed, shelter and clothe inmates, and a convict lease program cut costs and brought in money. Beyond that, officials could exploit the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery but allowed involuntary servitude for criminal punishment. When federal troops left the South in 1877 after Reconstruction, state officials who were hostile to former slaves handed down long prison terms and life sentences, even for petty crimes. Soon, blacks made up the majority of prisoners in the South. The Coal Creek War. Tennessee began leasing prisoners in 1866, and by 1891, the Tennessee coal mine in Anderson County adopted the practice. This fateful decision led to the Coal Creek War, where citizen miners attacked and burned the state prison, stockades, and mines, then loaded prisoners and guards alike onto a train headed out of town. Mining companies sent them back and state officials called in troops for protection. When months of small arms skirmishes led to dead men on both sides, officials realized the cost of maintaining a standing militia undercut any financial gains, and as convict lease contracts expired, legislation passed to construct the state's first maximum security prison, Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary. Brushy Mountain in the beginning. By 1896, inmates were building an on-site railroad spur, as well as the original wooden prison structure with their own hands. Between the ongoing violence, deadly mining accidents, and chronic illness, life inside Brushy was precarious to say the least. Diseases were rampant, including tuberculosis, typhoid fever, pneumonia, and syphilis, which alone affected 3/4 of the black prisoners. Beyond generally poor medical care and treatment, inmates were routinely beaten for underproducing in the mines, despite their dire health conditions, and many died as a result. There was never a death row at Brushy, but there was plenty of death, I promise you. While America was roaring through the 20s, convicts at Brushy spent their days in the dark of the mines, urged to dig faster with lashes from thick leather straps. Their nights weren't any better, with men stacked into the original wooden buildings that were falling apart and just waiting to catch fire. In 1931, Brushy held nearly 1,000 inmates, far more than it was ever meant to. In 1931, Brushy housed 976 men, roughly 300 more than its capacity. Overcrowding was so prevalent and persistent it drew comparisons to conditions inside the infamous Siberian prisons of the Soviet Union. The state's answer was simple. Plans were drawn for a new structure to be made of reinforced concrete, and they made convicts break sandstone out of the nearby quarry to build the new prison. Constructed in the shape of a Greek cross, it stood 4 stories high, boasted battlements atop, and by 1934 was surrounded by an 18-foot stone wall. For a moment, things got better. The new prison was safer, more sanitary, and built in the shape of a cross, offering inmates a narrow path to redemption. The modern era. Mining remained the sole mission of the prison until the 1960s, and in 1969 Brushy was reclassified as primarily maximum security when 100 beds were added to house lesser offenders outside the walls. Many of the new minimum security inmates were entrusted with jobs serving the outside community, such as participating in the Petros Voluntary Fire Department, which operated 24/7 between 1971 and 1994. By the middle of the century, Brushy's reputation as the last stop for the worst criminals had become legend. If you wore out your welcome at another prison or committed some unspeakable crimes, you ended up at Brushy, and let me tell you, that was never a good thing. In '57, after finally shutting down the hole, they built D Block to keep the nastiest inmates isolated from the rest. It just happens that D Block was built on the site of the old death house, where the bodies of dead inmates were kept until they were given back to their families or buried at the Paupers Cemetery up on the hill there. In '69, Brushy was reclassified as a maximum security prison. The end of the line. But convicts continued to work and die in the mines for decades. It was Lake Russell, a reform-minded warden and former football coach at nearby Carson Newman College, who finally stopped the mining at Brushy Mountain. Of course, the mines were also losing money. So was it a good warden, or a good businessman that put an end to it? That's Brushy for you. This was the most infamous era of Brushy's history, a time when the assassin James Earl Ray was transported here, tried to escape, failed, got stabbed. In '72 the guards went on strike, demanding security improvements, and Brushy was shut down for 4 years. So they improved some things and reopened Brushy in '76, but friends, let me tell you, it was still Brushy. Tensions between black inmates and white inmates threatened to overwhelm a system that just didn't seem capable of containing the evil of this place. In '82, the powder keg ignited. 7 white inmates held guards hostage at knife point. They took the guards' guns, found 4 of their black rivals in their locked cells and opened fire. They killed 2. The other 2 managed to survive by hiding in the corner behind their mattresses. People said things couldn't get any worse, and maybe, finally, they were right. Infamous inmates. James Earl Ray. James Earl Ray wasn't the meanest one to ever walk down these halls and sleep behind these walls, not by a long shot, but his is the name that echoes across Brushy's long history. Even before he confessed to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1969, Ray's life seemed to bend the wrong way. When he was a kid, his daddy passed bad checks and had the family assume false names to avoid the law. Ray joined the army at the close of World War II and served in Germany, but was discharged for ineptness and a lack of adaptability. He was always a thief, a fraud, and a criminal, and managed to escape a sentence for armed robbery, sneaking out of the Missouri State Penitentiary in a bakery truck. Ray arrived at Brushy in March of 1970, and he wasn't here a minute before his certifiable lack of adaptability and urge to escape was made apparent. A year after he arrived, Ray removed a cinder block from his cell and managed to squeeze through the hole. He might have escaped, but for his path ran smack into the prison steam plant, where the heat would have cooked him. A year after that, a guard caught Ray crawling with a makeshift saw, apparently hoping to cut his way out of an air vent. Then, in '77, Ray and 6 others climbed over the wall using a 16-foot ladder made of salvaged pipe. The FBI and U.S. Marshal Service swarmed into Morgan County, but a little more than 2 days later, local trackers and hound dogs found him exhausted and buried under leaves trying to mask his scent. He'd only made it few miles from the prison walls. Now the thing is, a lot of inmates and even some of the guards said they liked Ray. He was friendly and funny and didn't cause trouble, except for those escapes, you know. In '81, 3 inmates stabbed Ray 22 times. Some say it was payback for the assassination. Some say it was another of Ray's schemes, a way to get publicity and a new trial for what he claimed was a false confession. Ray left Brushy for good in '92, and died at the state facility in Nashville 6 years later.